I work for the proxy moderator, Professor Lai. Audience will how to see the why suddenly the Professor Lai become afraid. So first, third keynote speaker, I will introduce Professor Liang-Kung Chen. His talk today is Physio-Cognitive syndrome, a new proposal. Please, Professor Liang-Kung Chen.
Thank you, Professor Toba. A phenomenon that people have been discussed extensively in the past. We have a new idea, a new proposal, and a lot of new data to share, and we'd like to get comments and some for further improvement. So aging can be featured in many different fashions. You can take it from your appearance, your looking, but as geriatricians, we will take the best emphasis on function. So if you're doing research focused on physical function, you may say aging is starting from robust to pre-frail and frail, and then the endpoint is disability or mortality. But if you're doing dementia research, you will say aging starting from normal, MCI, dementia, and with the common endpoint, which is disability and mortality. But in fact, during the whole process of development, there's a highly interrelated in every stages. Frail people can be normal cognition or even dementia. MCI patient can be robust to frail. It is a highly interrelated. So if you look at this scheme, you could probably notice that the two patterns, they share the same common endpoint. But if you take it back further, that eventually they are sharing the same risk factor too. So with the same risk factor, same outcome, but the process during the development is very different. And the reason why we need to differentiate those things is because that we can provide a more precise understanding for the mechanism and related treatment. So there may be different treatment for different patients, although they are all suffering from functional decline. So to me, it's a process like a precision aging medicine, that there are different phenotypes, they are going on different presentation, although in the end, there's disability and mortality. So look at the epidemiology. Previously, there are a lot of reports showing this association, that when you're getting older, you're more frailer, and the MMSE score will go down. And the impairment in physical and cognitive function eventually had a synergistic effect. So if you have both of them, you have poorer prognosis. So that is what we know before. If you trace it back to the earlier in the cohort longitudinal study, so you'll find that along with your aging, physical frailty may come first, and then it shows cognitive impairment. So some other studies also shows that frailty eventually predicts the occurrence of all types of dementia, either vascular or Alzheimer. So here comes the question. Are those two conditions happening just coincidence? Or one is the consequence of the others? Or even stronger, there exists certain causal relationship. So what is the real relationship between these two phenotypes during aging? So this is our main question. But a lot of people also pay attention to it. So the IAGG-INA proposed a definition for cognitive frailty, which is the simultaneous presence of both the physical and cognitive impairment. Operationally, it is defined as the presence of physical frailty by Lindner-Freese criteria, plus MCI, defined by CDR equals to 0.5. But this definition is a conceptual proposal. It is not, at that time when it was proposed, there was not strong epidemiological support. But if you look at this definition, you may ask, what's the prevalence of this condition? It may be very, very low because overall people with physical frailty may only up to 7 to 10% in the community, and you have to select those with MCI. So it would be dropped to a very low prevalence, and you don't know whether they are still able to be reversed. So some further study compares those definitions, seeing that whether the definition of cognitive frailty can effectively predict adverse outcomes for older people. And the answer is cognitive frailty is no better than simply slowness plus cognitive impairment. So you don't need to collect 3 items in a physical frailty. Just 1 item will be bad enough, not good enough. That slowness alone is the first strong predictor for the further adverse event with or without cognitive impairment. If there's simultaneous cognitive impairment, that's even worse. So another group, PENSA, they try to modify the criteria because the thing that the definition for cognitive frailty may be problematic. First, the prevalence will be very low. And the second thing, it is probably irreversible status. So if it is irreversible, that surely it's good to identify something, but we're looking forward to get a better approach to prevent the occurrence of disability and dementia. So he modified the criteria into the potentially reversible and reversible cognitive frailty. In physical domain, he broadened the criteria into either pre-frailty or frailty, so which means with any one item of the 3 criteria. And in the cognitive domain, that if you are having the MCI, the CDR 0.5, it is the potentially reversible cognitive frailty. But if it's just pre-MCI status, who has the SCD, subjective cognitive decline, that is reversible cognitive frailty. Again, this is a conceptual proposal. So still no sufficient epidemiological data to prove whether it's reversible or not. At the same time, Joe Burgess in the Albert Einstein Institute in New York, he proposed another term trying to clarify this phenomenon, which is a motoric cognitive risk syndrome, MCRS. So defining the MCRS by slowness plus cognitive complaint, which is more equal to the SCD. So using several thousand cohort data, he proved that the MCRS is highly predictive for the adverse outcomes with higher prevalence, around 10 something, 7 to 10% something. So that may be meaningful in the communities. And so a lot of other foreign studies also confirm his proposal and the discovery. Then all those information came to us, we start to think about that condition. We know it's there. They're probably the co-occurrence of physical and cognitive declines. How can we properly diagnose them? And the greatest priority is the reversibility. How can we properly identify those at-risk population so that we can provide appropriate intervention to reverse those conditions or to postpone the occurrence of disability and dementia? So none of those studies shows the real reversibility. So we don't know that yet. So we're starting by using our data to see whether there should be any more modification. So first thing, we take the data-driven approach using the latent class analysis by our cohort data to see if there is the subtype of physical frailty. So in the end, we found that yes, there are subtypes. So there is a mobility subtype, which is featured by simply slowness and weakness. Slowness and weakness are highly clustered in our sample. And another subtype is, I call it non-mobility type. So it's malaise and weight loss. And some other people who have simply inactivity. So that's based on the analysis of latent class analysis. But is this classification really related to the outcomes? So we use our cohort sample to trace the outcome for 3 years. The answer is yes, the mobility type frailty has a higher risk of mortality compared with others, and their demographic characteristics are very different. So the mobility type frailty people, they are older, and they are thinner, and they are having less bone mass, less muscle mass, and they are poorer in the global cognitive function. In the non-mobility type people, they are younger, they are bigger, and they are having higher HbA1c and LDL. And more important, they have a higher depressive score. So they should be looks different. One is very skinny, another maybe a little bit overweight, and having different risk. But overall, to me, the mobility type looks like a neuromuscular skeletal system. And the non-mobility type is more like the cardiometabolic system. So that's their general appearance. And when we look at the outcome, the mobility type for older adult dies faster compared to the non-mobility type. But our cohort only has probably 3-4 years follow-up, and we are now collecting the 8-year follow-up. But at that time, 3 or 4 years may not be good enough. And especially those cases are not incident cases. So because probably when we define them as having those conditions or the frailty, they already present with those symptoms for years. So there can be a cumulative effect. So we need somebody's help. So with the assistance from Japan, the NCGG's 12-year cohort, we can get a very, very beautiful sample that starting every participant, starting from robust. And we're asking 2 questions. First, during the longitudinal development process, is there frailty subtype? And second, if there is frailty subtype, is it related to outcomes? So the answer is yes. We apply our definition into the Japanese cohort. It shows that the same, that Japanese cohort with mobility type frailty, they are more likely to develop more comorbidity in follow-up. And second, with more cognitive impairment. But that cognitive impairment is not in memory domain, mainly on the language and executive function. Not a mortality, because that's the design and the participants' characteristic of the Japanese cohort. And we also apply the group-based trajectory analysis, trying to see whether if, let's go back to the data-driven analysis, are they compatible with our prior definition about mobility subtype? And the answer is yes. So in the group-based trajectory analysis, it also shows similar pattern, that weakness and slowness always go together. So maybe someone come out first, but finally the other will come out. And their clustering effect is much stronger than the other components of frailty criteria. That also echoes our previous paper published in JAMDA that when you're having frailty, that basically you're much poorer in your cognitive function, not to mention that no matter memory or non-memory domain. But if you're in the pre-frailty status, the memory domain is intact, but the non-memory domain, mainly language and executive function, are impaired already. This discovery also echoed by Johns Hopkins group. They found that along with aging, the impairment in executive function comes much earlier than the memory domain. So it may be part of the early aging status or the normal aging process that the language and executive function impairment will come earlier than the memory complaints. So we're thinking there is idea, new proposal for us based on our finding. We're thinking those physio and cognitive decline can be re-described as follows, based on our previous finding, that we emphasize reversibility still. That is highly prioritized. We're not just making some definition to get paper published. We're hoping to help people. We're hoping to develop a criteria that we can identify people that can be reversed. So we're using the only mobility components for the frailty diagnosis, which is the slowness and weakness. In the cognitive assessment, we have to do unlike to the motor cognitive syndrome or the the modified cognitive frailty. They are using subjective cognitive complaints. That is accurate. I mean, that's effective in predicting further cognitive impairment or dementia. But however, the early decline starts in executive function. Probably the older adults do not have that feeling about cognitive decline. So at this moment, we still use the objective assessment, which is more comprehensive. In Japan, they use NCGG-FAT. It's better for the cognitive assessment. In Taiwan, we use MOCA. Or in another cohort, we're using very, very complex neuropsychological tests. But the only purpose is trying to differentiate the cognitive impairment into memory, non-memory, and executive function. So this is our proposal. And after that, we try to validate whether this phenomenon really occur in the community and is it all really associated with outcome. So we propose several outcome indicators. If this is a accelerated aging phenomenon, that of course mortality or the incident disability or incident dementia. So this is the outcome we're aiming to answer. So using our cohort in Yilan, so we found that overall the prevalence of this of the physio-cognitive decline syndrome is about 10-15% something, around 10 to 15%. And in the 3-4 year follow-up, yes, it predicts mortality. But you look at the survival curve, it's not really smooth because of the number of people who reach the outcomes. The number is really small. So we use another national cohort to validate this discovery based on our cohort. So the answer is the same. Yeah, with longer follow-up, 4 to 5 years, using a national cohort, the answer is yes, this physio-cognitive decline syndrome can predict all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality. But what about incident dementia? That we do not have that many cases. So again, we look for the collaboration from Japan, NCGG. Shimada's cohort, he had, I don't remember, 3,000 or 5,000 cases in the community. And then the answer is yes, this physio-cognitive decline syndrome predicts incident dementia. So basically our assumption was supported by those epidemiological studies. And it looks that from using the same criteria in Japan and in Taiwan, the prevalence around 10 to 15%, which is a meaningful number to intervene. So we're asking whether can it be reversible. So in Taiwan, we, with the support by the Health Promotion Administration many years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, we have a national cluster randomized control trial to prove whether a multimodal intervention can effectively prevent physical and cognitive decline in the older people. So the multimodal intervention, very similar to finger and a MAP study, but the only thing is it's a community-based health promotion activity that we do not have the channel to work with their GP. So the chronic disease control can be only done by health education. So not like a finger, they have a strong cardiovascular risk control. But still, this program introduced physical exercise, cognitive training, nutritional counseling, and more health education about their chronic conditions. But that does not aim for this physio-cognitive decline syndrome. But we can extract a subsample. We have around 1,000 something participants with mean age of 73. And here we extract the data for about 600, because we have to exclude that those with lower baseline MOCA score. So we're hoping that they're cognitive intact because we are taking the 1.5 SD, similar to the MSCI approach in any domain. So among the 600 cases, we're pretty lucky that they are evenly distributed in the case and control group, so that we can make further comparison. It's a randomized control trial, so their baseline characteristics just happen to be very identical. That even though it's not based on this criteria, but in this subsample, they're still very identical in their baseline characteristics. And the answer is yes. in terms of their cognitive function, the overall MoCA score, the PCDS subject, their MoCA score can be improved in 12 months intervention. We only get the funding for an intervention program for 12 months because it's a national program, although the government support for 4 years, but we have a lot of preparation and analysis work, so overall we just got the opportunity for 1 year intervention, and not able to get a bigger sample like finger with longer intervention. But still, it looks pretty good that in the 6 months, the difference is not significant. But in the 12 months, the overall MoCA score has been significantly improved in the intervention group. And if you break down in the different domains of the MoCA score, most of the improvement is in executive function and delayed memory, namely, not the recent memory, not the other components. It's mainly still related to language and executive function. That's quite compatible with the previous observational study. In the physical domain, the overall frailty status is reduced, and their activities are significantly improved. They had much more daily activities with better hand grip strength and better gait speed. Hand grip strength is insignificant, but still their daily activities and the frailty status is reduced. So we are quite happy about that. This, based on this definition, we did identify about 10 to 15% in the community who are at risk for accelerated aging, which means the faster decline in physical and cognitive domains. And they are potentially reversible based on the available data. And we are searching for, is there any possible etiology? If they, especially in these physical components, slowness and weakness, they highly constant. So would it be a specific underlying etiology? So we move on our cohort with the brain imaging. All of our cohort, the 1,500 cases, they have the brain MR scanned. And we compare the grade matter volume for those with and without the syndrome. So the first thing is, for those without the PCDS as a reference, and you break down the participant into people aged between 50 to 64 and 65 and above, because our cohort recruit subject age from 50s and above, because we're hoping to see the aging changes. So in the middle-aged subject who have PCDS, there is no very obvious gray matter morphological deficit. But if you look at the seniors, people aged over 65, the deficit in hippocampus, amygdala, and cerebellum are quite significant. So that is reasonable to me because there may be some hidden etiology. While you are still relatively younger or in the middle age, the deficit is on a molecular or cellular level, not the structural changes yet. When you're getting older, the accumulated deficit in the cellular functions then become the structural changes. So that's our explanation. And then we're thinking, hippocampus, amygdala, and cerebellum, are they really related or just another coincidence? So we're hoping to find if there's any tract linking those three parts. That would be easier for us to explain the association. But there is no such a tract being reported in the neuroanatomy. So using the imaging technique, we use the diffusion tensor imaging, and sorting by the three major C's of the deficit, hippocampus, amygdala, and cerebellum. And we did identify a tract that potentially existed to linking these three areas. So they are also interrelated in the brain. So we're quite happy that because all those data are now under review or in revision, So officially it's unpublished yet, but we're quite happy to share the result with you. That we're seeing something new, that there may be a potentially underlying pathoetiology pathway for a certain presentation of the people. But what about the real mechanism? Because so far we see is the epidemiological study, and the imaging is the structural association. What about the mechanism? Brain-muscle crosstalk has been discussed extensively in the past, but most of the answers are only the BDNF. Because of the blood-brain barrier, usually, even though you identify something in the serum, in the blood, they cannot penetrate the blood-brain barrier if it is intact. If we are talking about someone who has a certain disease or certain syndrome that had their blood-brain barrier being incompletely preserved, that of course they can leak into the brain. But we're talking about normal aging, so usually maybe the blood-brain barrier remains intact still, and most of the proteins that you identify in the peripherally in the blood would not have the opportunity to enter the brain. So the only model a lot of people talk about is BDNF, but is BDNF enough to explain everything? Probably yes, but probably not. So we recently are starting another study. We found that myostatin is a myokine, so the action on muscle is pretty straightforward. But however, some animal study and cell line study, they found that neuron also secrete myostatin. That's strange, that because some messenger RNA of myostatin can be identified in neuron. Why would the neuron need a myokine? So what's the real function of myostatin in neuron? So another Japanese group using the animal and the cell line study, they found that myostatin in neuron, the effect is to delay the neural regeneration, the neural differentiation, and to accelerate apoptosis. So the action is very similar to muscle. If the role of myostatin in muscle and brain can be synchronized, who gave the order? So we also are using the animal and the cell line cultures to identify a good new biomarker, which is a microRNA. That we have shown that microRNA can be secreted as a form of exosome by the sarcopenic muscle fibers. And that exosome can penetrate the blood-brain barrier into the brain, and in neuron, this exosome can trigger apoptosis and neurodegeneration, which means brain and muscle are connected not just through spinal cord, may go through circulation, and there may be some new pathway. The brain and muscle are connected. So we are gradually hoping to establish the whole mechanism there, how muscle and brain interact, and and we're also trying to identify whether in the subject with PCDS, this microRNA's level is higher, and trying to build up the connection between the human model and the finding in the animal. So lastly, to conclude our discovery in the past few years, so we would like to propose together with our Japanese colleague that a new syndrome called the Physio-Cognitive decline syndrome. It sounds similar to cognitive frailty or motoric cognitive risk syndrome, but different, because the data I've shown you that we don't think the 5 items of the physical frailty are really independent. So they maybe have some clustering phenomenon that hint for unique pathoetiology. And on the other hand, in memory component, we don't think only through the subjective memory complaint can be satisfied, because early cognitive decline starts with executive function. So that we define this syndrome by using the mobility component of physical frailty plus the comprehensive assessment for the cognitive performance. And we've got a prevalence about 10 to 15%, and they are highly predictive for the adverse outcomes. And through the brain imaging study, we can identify a potential track and their potential new biomarkers connecting sarcopenia and neurodegeneration. And we're quite happy that in Japan, using the cohort imaging study, they also identify similar finding in the aging. They're also linking hippocampus, amygdala, and cerebellum. So it's very, very exciting finding that with the same proposal that we can validate both Taiwan and Japan's data in cohort with great support from Professor Toba and Professor Alai. So this is my talk. Thank you very much.